Story 1. Malicious people telling lies is news, and hundreds of millions of citizens believing the lies, then thinking the other side is the one that's misled. Tragic. Story 2. In the United Kingdom, a huge problem is homelessness because of a complete lack of affordable housing. There is a lot of house building going on in my area, but they are putting up detached 3- and 4-bedroom homes. We need prefabricated homes. They were a brilliant solution to a dire situation after the war. Let us do it again. In fact, there are quite a few of them still standing and occupied in my city. They have bricked around them and put on pitched roofs over the years. Story 3. People hate each other. Not just dislike or detest, but absolutely hate. There is constant anxiety about what's next. It's not a good place to live. There is a lot of segregation again, and not just racial. Story 4. I live in America and pretty much everyone is economically illiterate. I'd wager 99% of the United States population has never taken an economics class in high school or college. This applies to everyone, including highly educated doctors, lawyers, professors, engineers, and so on. Many of the political arguments in the United States remind me of devout religious groups that argue about their version of creationism because they don't understand the scientific method. Story 5. I'm in Sweden. Looking at today's hot news in politics, it seems to be about certain guns that you can get for hunting but were not used in a recent school shooting. There's a leadership crisis in the second largest party. The chairman for the Congress Justice Committee stepped down because of it. He's part of that party. It wasn't on my bingo card for 2025, that's for sure. Story 6. Disinformation and misinformation are simply being accepted as fact, with people either not bothering to do research or refusing to accept evidence that counters their beliefs and what they feel should be true. Story 7. Apathy. Nobody cares anymore. I live in Australia and the only things people care about are house prices, money, alcohol, food, sport, and sex. That is literally it. Story 8. That we somehow still can't hold our politicians accountable. We have been spending millions on trying to save this one bird for over 20 years. It gets worse every year. No matter how much money is thrown at it, the birth rate is heavily declining. Surprise. It's because no one checked the farmers that received subsidies to make space for these birds to breed. Want to know what they do when they find a nest? The nest gets a meter around it. The rest of the land is heavily farmed. Like that is helping. That is the level of conservation that has been going on for years. And it's only the godwit. We have so many talking heads in our politics that nothing happens. We are so behind on everything. The most frustrating? Amsterdam, known as the weed capital. Technically, weed is still illegal here, just not enforced. So there is no tax on it, and the laws are now that you can only have one weed shop per town. My town thankfully got grandfathered in, so we still have 3. We just can't open another one. It's still not legal. Freaking United States legalized weed before we did. Our public transportation is the most expensive of all Europe. Switzerland's public transportation is cheaper and better organized. In most new places, they have stopped putting in bus stops. Our grocery prices are through the roof, so the people who can now all drive to Germany for their smokes and groceries. We raised the price of a pack of cigarettes to roughly 20 euros a pack. But in Germany, it's a third of the price, which for most Dutch people is less than a 2-hour drive. I can drive through my whole country in 5 hours from north to south. East to west is about 3. It's flat. But we have the best cheese. My conclusion is my country's biggest problem is not being able to actually make changes. Story 9. Currently in Taiwan, China is refusing to recognize us as a sovereign nation and is eager to take us by force if needed. Comparatively minuscule, but the first thing I thought of is riding and driving laws. Story 10. Desperate and undereducated people being brainwashed by rich sociopaths to blame all of their problems on foreigners rather than the rich sociopaths themselves, leading to a rise in misplaced nationalism and tribalism with only anger in place of actual solutions. Either that or the English. Story 11. Not being America or the United Kingdom. You have no idea how annoying it is for everything to expect you to live in or near an English-speaking country. But seriously, the former and somewhat current prejudice against the Sami. Story 12. A speculative-style property market that forces middle and working class to compete in a free market against billion-euro hedge funds. Guess the country. Story 13. The rich people convince the poor people that the poor people's problems are because of other poor people, when the poor people's problems are actually because of the rich people. This situation makes the poor people poorer and the rich people richer. Story 14. Australia. We have more natural advantages than any other country and have nothing to show for it. Also, we don't know the meaning of the word culture. Not saying it's bad here, just a bit disappointing what could have been. Story 15. Systemic corruption. I realize that's 95% of places, but everything from why trash doesn't get picked up to insanely high household debt is the result of this here in Thailand. Story 16. I live in Vancouver, British Columbia. Lately, there's been a huge surge in random attacks, specifically stabbings. Our justice system does not seem to care about that, so people who are a real danger to our society end up getting let out of jail within days. It's absolutely insane. Story 17. The media is invested in creating controversy where none exists and constantly and consistently lie to get people riled up. The worst part is people still fall for it, despite how many times these major media outlets have been caught lying or sued for their lies. Story 18. Oligarchy. Billionaires. Corporations. Corruption. Money in politics. Unfettered greed. Yes, it's the United States. Support it if you want, it's the truth and what is going on right now. Headed, of course, by Elon Musk, Trump, and the Make America Great Again cult. Story 19. Trump, because I live in Canada, and his stupidity is taking the attention away from our own stupid government, who deserve a lot more criticism over how they've messed things up, and I'm worried people are going to forget. Trump is just a loudmouth loser. He doesn't even deserve our attention. Story 20. Ian's old political structure designed to perpetuate our hideously destructive class system. Even with democratic elections and the very best efforts of some highly intelligent, motivated, and capable people, it's hard to change when the institutions of power rest on a monarch. Story 21. Presenting partial information to manipulate viewpoints, with most recipients not caring enough to research the full story to get the facts surrounding whatever concern it is, or knowledgeable enough to understand they are not getting the full story. For example, sharing clips of a news conference or document that is unflattering or overly flattering to a public individual, but leaving out access to the full session or article that directly conflicts with the narrative presented. Story 22. I am from Serbia, and I think that apathy is the biggest issue here. People are just used to the fact that many things are not that good, but they do not want to change anything. They are used to these conditions and think that it is normal. Story 23. The healthcare system in America. I am a registered nurse in a hospital, and it is terrifying that virtually every coworker of mine has an out plan. People do not realize how close we are to healthcare collapse. You can cite political issues all day, but how fast would everything collapse without adequate healthcare? Story 24. Around half of the people do not have a clear understanding of how to find good information, and their legitimate concerns and worries are transferred onto scapegoats and conspiracy theories. Story 25. Housing being used as investment vehicles rather than homes. The slow progress of unlocking land and building more houses. Basically, a housing shortage that exacerbates all the other problems. Story 26. American individualism. Prizing individual freedom and happiness above all else results in people not caring about the community at large, causing infighting and a lack of empathy. Not many people realize they have a duty of kindness and care toward others as well as their own well-being. Story 27. Politicians keep passing new laws, but they do not fund their enforcement. So, poor outcomes result from both the police, local authorities, and government departments. We mostly have all the laws we need if only they could get on top of the enforcement. Story 28. People who have never left our country are saying that the one we live in is just so awful and mean. Go spend time in a less fortunate country, and I bet you'll stop complaining. Story 29. Too many opinions, stakeholders, and laws are causing paralysis in effective progress. The government seems to do nothing but debate and demand more investigation reports on any issue. Story 30. No one just talks and debates anymore. Corruption has succeeded in dividing us, so now instead of debating with each other and finding the best way to do things, we just scream at each other and get nothing done. Never seeing this is what they want. Story 31. Americans who live here are spreading Christianity. My countrymen aren't coming to America in large numbers to spread our religion. Why do we have to allow Americans to come here so they can spread their religion to us? It's a double standard. It doesn't make sense at all. Story 32. Starmer, the Labour Party does not represent normal, working-class people anymore. Politicians should not be allowed to accept gifts from party donors because it just leads to corruption. If he really cared about the people, he would have asked for Lord Ali to donate money to charities and community projects instead of accepting designer suits and expensive glasses from him. Story 33. American here. The biggest problem I see is that our educational system doesn't teach fiscal policy or civics to the average person. This equates to the general population accepting arguments that aren't based on reality as facts simply because they sound good. Essentially, the average person doesn't see historical trends unfolding, hasn't been taught to identify them, doesn't understand how the tax system actually works, and has no clue how policies actually impact inflation, the economy, or any facet of reality. It is the equivalent of believing the solution to poverty is simply for the Federal Reserve to print more money. Story 34. We live in the best of times. If someone could go back in time even 100 years, they would be begging to come back to 2025. It is the best it has ever been, kids. Quit your complaining. Story 35. The inability of people to use basic logic and reasoning and apply critical thinking skills. And a 2-second attention span due to social media. Story 36. So, I like the idea of going with green energy and such, but we need tighter control over the money we give to green companies. I want them to actually build infrastructure that produces energy within a certain period, reach the stated goal, or incur a penalty, even blacklist them if they just take tax money and do nothing. I think we are being too generous, spending tax money on non-concrete projects. Story 37. America. Hard to decide between hyper-individualism or poor education. I think a majority of our problems boil down to one or a combination of both of these things. And I could argue that the two are linked. Story 38. Nobody ever gives me cash. Every day I sit around waiting for all my free cash to appear, and it never does. I'm really bummed out about it. If I just had some free cash, I'd be so happy. It's a tragedy, honestly. Story 39. Employers are not paying their employees enough or providing proper benefits. It is the biggest problem in most developed countries. Not only do people lack what they need for a basic existence, but we have also shifted obligations that used to be covered by companies to governments. As a result, governments have to provide more services and go further into debt. That is why every government at every level is so in debt in today's society. This then leads to inflation because there is too much money in the system, a vicious cycle that would be solved if companies took care of employees like they used to. Story 40. Agree, lack of empathy, but that's global. This bothered me a lot more before the relative issues in the world, but in Canada, the taxes we pay for what little we get in healthcare are a big problem. However, when it comes down to it, you can have your $600,000 intensive care unit stay covered, so this is relative. Story 41. Educational inflation. One can barely even get custodian work without completing some form of 3-year post-mandatory program. The highly educated masses can't find appropriate work since many markets are oversaturated, so they have to take low-level jobs, effectively outcompeting people with less or no post-mandatory education and inadvertently creating higher unemployment and greater pressure on welfare programs. Sweden. Story 42. Education. And I do not just mean traditional math and science. People are coming out of mandatory schooling with fewer critical thinking and troubleshooting skills. They are less prepared for the world and don't have basic skills in economics, mechanical, or electrical principles. They can't debate or distinguish facts from opinions. Despite having access to the internet, the greatest information tool on the planet, they can't seem to use it to any real effect. We are getting dumber, and it is causing both political parties to become less able to argue quality points effectively. Story 43. Romania. Generalized corruption and lack of minimal education for many citizens. Our presidential election was canceled 2 months ago because the far-right candidate won the first round of elections after reporting zero costs with his presidential campaign. Some people sponsored him without reporting that to electoral authorities. He used farms of bots and creators on TikTok to gain votes. Secret services also said it's very likely a foreign country helped with his presidential campaign, that foreign country being Russia, of course. Story 44. Peronism is a political party that was built around the figure of a fascist who admired Mussolini, married a prostitute, and was a pedophile, as his mistress was 14 when he was 58. People liked him at the time because he was a populist, and his influence grew like a cancer that culminated in a subset of his political party called Kirchnerism, which is led by a corrupt ex-president who is a literal convicted thief that stole millions from the people and is rumored to have killed her husband, also an ex-president. Kirchnerism's policies ended up destroying our economy and culture, and after they lost in the last election, things are finally starting to improve.